5 Live Formula One.
Just 4 rounds to go of the F1 Championship, and there are 47 points between Max Verstappen, who leads the way, and Lando Norris. Can he close the gap, or is it just too much? We have all our experts. We have Andrew Benson, Harry Benjamin, and welcome back, Jolyon Palmer. Fanfare?
The prodigal son returns.
Oh, and it's good to be back.
It's good to have you back. That's all I can say. How have you been? How's life?
Yeah, great. Ticking along. Enjoying this Formula One season. That's one of the greats, I think, as well.
Good memories of Brazil?
I love Brazil. Andrew was very quick to remind me earlier on that this was actually my least enjoyable Formula One race, or actually any race that I ever did, was the Brazilian Grand Prix of 2016, which was the only time I raced in a Formula One car in Brazil. But it's cool to watch, isn't it? It's a great one to commentate on. It's a good
remind
track.
us exactly why it was so bad? Sorry.
It was delugeable rain. It was a really long race. It was red flagged, and it was one of those ones that nowadays you'd be licking your lips watching it, listening to it, commentating on it. But sitting in the car, it was so difficult. It was aquaplaning. You couldn't see a thing. And as a result, I crashed quite early on.
You're not the only one to have done that, though. But I mean, I know we all have different sort of experience levels here. But for me, Brazil used to always...
How was your racing career in Brazil?
Well, it was a little shorter than yours. But for me, Brazil is always...
And mine was 12 laps.
Yeah. Brazil was always the final round for me, or it should be. I have that kind of emotional tie to it. And I always think back, there's usually rain involved. And I think back to 2012, really. I know there's been a handful of epic races in Brazil, but that 2012 race where you've got Vettel versus Alonso, and then Vettel spun round in turn 4 and he clouts into Perez and Bruno Senna. Like, there's always something quite special about racing in Interlagos, and I do kind of miss it as being the end of the season.
But you know what? So 2007 was the season finale, and Kimi Räikkönen somehow managed to overturn the gap to Lewis Hamilton. Then you had 2008, where it was won on the final corner as Hamilton overtook Timo Glock, famously. But even 2021, where it wasn't even it was the 4th last round, as it is this year, it was still a momentous weekend when Lewis Hamilton had to charge from the back of the field, Max Verstappen was at the front, and then they had the big moment in the Grand Prix. This is the sort of race on the calendar that big moments just gravitate towards. They always happen because you can race on this track, you can overtake, and tensions are always high. And they're high again right now, which is fun.
Yeah, stuff just happens in Brazil, whether it's inside the track or outside. Remember last year with the big black cloud coming over, and it was almost like night. Exactly, yeah. And then people, outside the track, Jenson Button nearly got held up at gunpoint on the road down to the river outside the track. One year, it's just action central, Sao Paulo.
Yeah, for good or bad, to be clear. It's certainly not all positive in that regard.
Which is actually the perfect backdrop for this weekend, because we've got so much spice, so much tension going into this weekend. As we said at the top, 47 points between the 2 top drivers. But actually, there's more than that, isn't there? There's so much going on track, off track, penalties, stewards. Let's get into it. Norris and Verstappen, they're not seeing eye to eye, Andrew, and it's fascinating for an outsider and for a neutral to watch on.
It's a clash of racing personalities, just like it was with Hamilton and Verstappen in 2021. And actually, the clash is between Verstappen and the rest of the grid, pretty much. We'll get into that as we go on. But 2 incidents in 2 races, one in which Norris got a penalty, which a lot of people thought he shouldn't have, including himself. Another race, the next one in Mexico, where Verstappen got 2 penalties for 2 incidents of what most people think was unfair driving. Verstappen doesn't agree, and Norris is calling Verstappen out. Verstappen's saying, I don't care, I know what I'm doing, sort of thing. And it's just boiling up really, really nicely.
Jolyon, what's your take as a driver, former driver, on what's gone on track, off track? How do you stand with what the stewards have ruled?
I think the Austin one was an outlier for me. I think I can see, it's a difficult situation because Norris technically gained the place off the road, but we covered this afterwards, didn't we? Verstappen went off the road in defence, which I feel like has been glossed over by the stewards too much. And Mexico, the parameters with which they were the first incident was, it was just slightly against Verstappen, whereas in Austin, it was slightly for Verstappen with regards to him being ahead at the apex. The rules themselves, I really don't like the way that they're played out at the moment. It's down to the guidelines that came in back in 2021, where there was more sort of definitive positions that attacking drivers could be on the inside, the outside, or defending drivers, and what would be given preference. But what it means is you kind of have to freeze frame all of these racing moments, go back, watch them in slow-mo, zoom in, and see who had an inch of car ahead at the apex. And if they were ahead, there's no penalty. If they were behind, there's a penalty. And it's naff for Formula One, this overall. So basically, Verstappen was given a penalty in Mexico. It was quite right. He was behind. He got away with it in Austin. The second one in Mexico was a madness, I think, from Verstappen. And the 20 seconds of penalties was probably the least that he deserved for the two incidents.
Well, Max Verstappen faced the press yesterday. Here's a little taster of what he said.
Sometimes they work for you, sometimes they work against you. I think it's never going to be perfect, because even if you remove rules, then you get into a battle, then you want more rules because it's not clear what is allowed or not. Then when you have too many rules, you want less rules. It just keeps on going left and right all the time. Do I think it's over-regulated? Probably yes. I mean, in general, the rule book is only getting bigger and bigger every single year. I don't think that's always the right way forward.
Damon Hill this week said he isn't sure if you're capable of racing fairly, so I just wanted to get your response to that. And obviously there's been quite a bit of criticism since the last race about your tactics. Do you think in any way you're being unfairly targeted?
I don't listen to those individuals. I just do my thing. I'm a 3-time world champion. I think I know what I'm doing.
Do you think you're being unfairly targeted? Just the second half of that question.
Honestly, I have my opinions. I don't need to share them.
Wow, there is a lot to unpick from that. Andrew Benson.
So I think the key line is, I know what I'm doing. He absolutely does know what he's doing. He's driving like this deliberately. He's driven like this for a long time. The defence against Lewis Hamilton at turn 4 at Brazil in 2021 was the same model as the defence against Norris at turn 12 in Austin. Be on the inside. He always forces the person attacking him to go to the outside, and make sure he's ahead at the apex, and use that as an excuse for it's my corner, and therefore I get to choose the line. And his line in both Austin and in Brazil in 2021 was to go off the track. Now, he thinks that's fair defence. All the other drivers think it's not right that you should be able to go off the track, defending your position, take your rival with you and keep the position.
And they're right, because it's obviously not right. You have the track there as the limits. If you're allowed to keep the place off the track, no one will ever pass you, really. And that's the issue, really. It's having the skill of defending. Where the guidelines are written, if you're ahead at the apex, then you can keep the place. And this comes back to what was the Austin situation and the Brazil one, as Andrew said. The skill of racing is not to be ahead at the apex. Anyone can be ahead at Harry Benjamin can be ahead at the apex.
Always is.
But the skill is to be ahead at the apex, but not go off the track. If you don't mind going off the track on the exit, anyone can be ahead at the apex. And that's why, obviously, the guidelines are there. I think everyone thought that would be followed, but there is no exact wording that that's how it should be. There's no wording that that's exactly how it should be followed. So there's a little bit of wriggle room, and Max has kind of exploited that. But no other driver, as Andrew said, was thinking that was the ruling.
But is that where Max is playing smart? And up until the guidelines are updated around the Qatar weekend, he will continue to drive like that until it is categorically decided that he cannot. But equally, as a fan, first and foremost of Formula One, this isn't really what we want to see. The title protagonists, the battles for the podium, this isn't how we want it to pan out, is it? Like, why, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton were having an amazing battle, wheel to wheel, kept it nice and clean, gave each other the right amount of room, and we got a really epic battle for it. Yes, they're teammates, so maybe they're erring on the side of caution here. But equally, I think for me, there comes a point where this isn't good racing fundamentally. It's almost just like wacky races and shove your competitor off and deal with the consequences later. And as a pinnacle of motorsport for Formula One, that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, it's action, but it's not skill. And we want to watch the most skillful racers battling it out. As you said, Hamilton, Russell battle, which was nice. And they were teammates and they were giving each other just enough space. But as much as they were teammates, they desperately wanted to beat the other, even if it was for 4th and 5th in a Mercedes. You really want to beat your teammate, but they didn't want to crash with each other as well. We want to see skillful battles, not battles that just end in a heap in one corner and then everyone pointing to the rule book and the stewards room deciding who wins. And I think an issue here is the amount of times you look through Max's racing and he's forcing stewards to make decisions on who wins. He will never accept second place when he wants to defend a position. He will never at some point cede, as Russell did with Hamilton in the end, where actually you're in too tricky a position, the attack has been too persistent for too long, and in the end it's just too difficult to defend. Max has defended really well in the past, but there's a moment where all the other 19 drivers would say, I've done my best, I can't do anything more, whereas Max would then take it beyond the limit of fairness and make this and give the stewards a decision to make, which is just not a good position for the sport.
There's another parallel here with 2021 as well. In 2021, Verstappen had an advantage in the points and Hamilton was trying to catch up. So Verstappen could afford a crash more than Hamilton could. It's the same situation now. Verstappen's ahead on points. Norris is trying to catch up. Verstappen knows Norris cannot afford not to finish a race. We've just heard, actually, Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, talking in the press conference about the one regret they've got this year is Austria and allowing that to become an incident where they collided and Norris lost out. Even though Verstappen got penalised and it was Verstappen's fault for that incident, Norris was the one who retired, not Verstappen. Verstappen scored points, Norris didn't. And Austin, Mexico, Norris has been driving very carefully, very intelligently, avoiding a crash. But most people judging racing on the morals and ethics of it would say that avoiding a crash or putting someone in a position where they have to choose to avoid a crash is not a right and fair way to go racing.
Is this what the greats do, though? Schumacher, Senna, Verstappen.
So I was thinking about this after the weekend. I don't think, and there's certainly not many drivers that would ever in the history of Formula One go to these lengths to win. We're talking not necessarily races, but a championship. You've just mentioned two that you could say potentially, and they are in the pantheon of greats, the greatest of all time, Senna and Schumacher. But I also think the consistency with which Max does it, I feel like it's unprecedented. 2021, his only other title battle. Let's be honest, 22 was not a battle. 23 was a whitewash. So now we're into the second one. I don't even know if this is necessarily a title battle. I mean, Norris is now 47 points behind with 4 races to go. We're all tenuously talking about a championship battle. Max he's in a comfortable position still. He's obviously not feeling comfortable, which is interesting in itself. But again, the lengths that he's going, where you're having so many races where you're thinking, the ethics of the racing is questionable. And I'm really talking about the second move in Mexico here. The first one, you could argue it as a racing incident with a view to, the Austin one as well. But the second one, if Norris turns in and doesn't avoid the crash, that looks like one of the most cynical takeouts that you've ever seen in Formula One. It was not a move that was ever on. It was a move that was guaranteed to end up in a heap, or as it happened, Norris avoiding it and Verstappen keeps the place. You don't see too many of them when you look through the whole history. I mean, Andrew, you've been following Formula One for longer than me. Can you think of these sort of moments when you think of the past? They're few and far between.
So the obvious ones are Schumacher against Villeneuve at Jerez in 97, where Villeneuve was clean through on the inside and Schumacher turned in trying to take him out and ended up taking himself out and got disqualified from the championship as a result. Villeneuve became champion. And then Senna at Suzuka in 1990, the second of the two incidents. Senna didn't do that all the time. In fact, Senna was really tough with Prost and people complained about his driving, but that was the only time when he was absolutely, completely cynical, if I remember correctly. And he did it because he felt provoked. It was a combination of events that had happened starting the previous year when they'd had the collision at the chicane. He carried on, Prost retired. He went on to fight back and win the race, and then was disqualified questionably, and that made Prost champion. And he felt that Jean-Marie Balestre, who was the president of the governing body at the time, had done that for Prost. So the next year in Suzuka, Senna qualified on pole. Pole was on the inside. He wanted it moved to the outside. Balestre wouldn't move it to the outside. Senna decided, well, this guy screwed me over last year. If Prost gets to the first corner first, as I suspect he will, because he's on the racing line, I'm going to take him out. He's not going any further. And that's what he did. I don't remember him doing it again. He was tough. But this dive-bombing defence that Verstappen has employed, according to the rules, what he did in Austin, there was nothing wrong with it. But the rest of the drivers feel there is something morally wrong with it, ethically wrong with it. And actually, the interesting thing is that the FIA have got themselves in this position. Actually, the guidelines in 2022 were different. They changed them in 2023, and actually they presented them to the guideline, to the drivers. The drivers never actually approved them formally. They said, we've not got the time to do this now, and the guidelines just got put in. And this rule about getting to the apex first was in those guidelines that was added then, wasn't in 2022. And now the drivers all want it to be changed. And what the Austin incident is what led to that request in Mexico in the drivers' briefing.
Is it this unwillingness to relent, though? Because you even go back to 2021, Monza, into the first chicane, when two champions, Hamilton being the other, are unwilling to give each other the room when there was a bailout option. And in the end, well, Hamilton ends up with Verstappen on top of him. Both are out in that moment. And that, to me, is what it kind of boils down to a little bit with Verstappen. It's a different type of move than what we're basing on. But it comes back to that unwillingness to concede against all odds.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference to me between the Austin and the first Mexico moment, which is probably more in line with the Monza moment, the Silverstone moment in my eyes, where Hamilton hit Verstappen and the shoe was on the other foot, where you can argue in all of them it's hard racing, but you can see the justification in it. It's the second Mexico moment where I'm thinking comparisons to your Villeneuve, Jerez, or your Prost and Senna in Suzuka. And also, and when you think back to 2021 and the other one, when you look at the Brazil one, again, is desperate defense from Max in 21, but the Jeddah race was actually the one where it was time and time again a lot more cynical, the driving and the defense. So I do think, Max is under scrutiny, but he can only blame himself for being there. There's plenty of other drivers in the field that the media's looking at as well, but they're not picking up 20 seconds worth of penalties. The week after, they've just had another incident that's put themselves under the microscope. That's just not happening for anyone else.
Well, what about Lando? He was asked in the media whether it means he will have to race Max differently, and also whether his relationship with him is changing.
I think the same. I mean, I've not spoken to him. I've not really seen him. I saw him this morning and we smiled, but that was also, for me, the same. It doesn't change. I race in a strong and fair way like I've always done. It's for him to change, not me. So I want clean, fair racing. And that's what I do, that's what I provide, and that's how I race. It's how I've always raced in my career. It's not for me to change, it's for the other side to change. He wants to win the championship, I want to win the championship, but the way he can win the championship is a very different way to how I need to win the championship. Whether that changes how we are personally, it probably will a little bit, but this is not my concentration or place for concern at the minute.
So Lando isn't going to change the way he drives, but Max isn't going to change the way he drives over. So we're at a stalemate again. And as we've all picked up, Verstappen keeps on doing this. So is it going to take another regulation, more rules for this to be sorted out in the end?
Well, I mean, he was given 20 seconds of penalty in Mexico. So that sorted itself out, really. What he did was twice against the rules, and he got penalised twice. I mean, I guess the question is, what can Norris do? What can he do differently? It's difficult to see what he does to race Max differently. If Max wants to finish ahead or exit a corner ahead, he will. I don't really see in these incidents what other option there is for Lando.
Well, let's hear from George Russell. He's the chairman of the GPDA, basically the drivers' union.
I mean, we had the discussion last week in Mexico, and the majority were aligned what needs to change. Understandably, I think the FIA wanted a bit of consistency, but again, the majority felt that if something is incorrect, we should make a change and we should implement it straight away. And I mean, if you look in Mexico, penalties were awarded. I think they were the correct penalties. Maybe they should have been awarded in Austin as well. But I think everyone is pretty aligned on where the limit is.
We heard Max saying in the press conference, I'm a 3-time world champion, I know what I'm doing. Is he behaving respectfully against other drivers, or is he getting too aggressive, too selfish on the battle against Lando?
I mean, he is a 3-time world champion and he knows what he's doing. There's no doubt about it. And he's a hard racer. He's always been aggressive, and I think that's great. And if you go beyond the limit, you get penalised. If you're on the limit, you pull off something great. And last week he went beyond. He got penalised times before. He's been on the limit and hasn't. So he knows what he's doing, and I think the penalties last week were correct, and he can't argue with that.
So consistency when it comes to the FIA stewards, who there are 4 of them each time they race, and one of them stays the same from the last race, the rest of them change, and those are the people who apply the rules. Is there any other way to do it? Does it come down to the fact that they now need permanent stewards? I don't know how you solve this problem.
I'd love to see permanent stewards in Formula One.
Would you want to be one?
Not really.
You'd be the perfect person.
So you know what? Firstly, and this is not in relation to me whatsoever, but they also need to pay the stewards a decent amount of money.
That's
and I'm not putting myself in
Then
the
he might
frame
do
here.
it.
Exactly.
When they come to me with a good offer. But seriously, the stewards they're volunteers. They're not being paid to do their job. Imagine another sport where the stewards have such a prominent role that they're officiating matches, effectively officiating the race, and yet they're volunteering. They're not actually they're not being paid for it.
They are getting quite a lot of expenses, to be fair.
Oh, you can buy me a nice steak lunch, but that's not making you a professional.
No,
so
true.
they're doing it because they want to do the job. But I think it's time for permanent stewards, because I am a former driver, but I have different views subtly to other former drivers. And you can see sometimes even the drivers on the grid now, there's 20 of them. They don't all agree with things. A lot of the time the majority do, or the vast majority do. But you have different margin depending on which driver you are and the nuance of the detail, the minutiae of it. But if you have a rotating panel, one day you have me as a steward, one day you have someone else, something that was okay one day in my eyes might not be okay in someone else's eyes. And that's understandable because we read racing differently. If you have a permanent steward, then the same thing that was okay one day has to be okay the next day. And if they explain the decisions, then everyone knows where you're at. And in a world where the drivers don't change, race on race, the key team personnel, the race engineers are there all the races. The team principals are pretty much all the races. The race director, Niels Wittig, is there at all the races. The safety car driver is there at all the races. Why are we not having the refs? Why are they not the same refs? I understand in football, when you have 10 games kicking off at the same time, it's a tough job for them to do everything. But there's one race a week. Let the same people be the officials. Get the best people for the job. Pay them a sensible salary for the job, and get the best people on the job doing it all the time and be accountable for the decisions they make.
Well, I think that's it, though, isn't it? Not to be crass, but I think it is the fact that it's not a full-time paid role, that it doesn't really attract people who want to invest their time for 24 races for the next couple of seasons. And even if you do, okay, yes, we always have one that carries over, so that element of consistency remains the same. You need almost I know we have a pool of people that do the stewarding, but you need a sort of permanent pool that alternate, that all have good historical accountability of previous incidents that they can apply to. But also that team, whether they be on the ground at the track, need to be backed up by almost a team who's maybe back in, like in the gallery or back at base, like a VAR type thing, who is able to take a little bit more time to look at an incident and decide before the checkered flag flies. Because sometimes I feel like there's pressure to make a decision from the stewards, regardless, before the checkered flag comes out. And that can sometimes, I think, then open yourself up to inconsistencies, because I'm just imagining them all bickering, going, well, we need to make a decision. Let's do this because we did that one time.
But that's wrong in itself. Unless they're clear in the decision, then don't let the pressures get to you. You have to be clear and then make the right decision, even if it takes a little bit longer.
Now, we have had some action today. Harry Benjamin, talk us through what happened in sprint qualifying.
Yeah, so just the one practice before we go straight into 3 frenetic sessions, slightly shorter than usual qualifying. The medium tyres for the first 2 sessions. The big name to fall in SQ1 was Fernando Alonso, out in 16th. And then we moved into the next part in SQ2, and out in 11th, Lewis Hamilton didn't make it through, and neither did Sergio Perez. It seemed like there was a bit of miscommunication there with the team, not getting a final lap in place. He's down in 13th. But then it was through up into SQ3, so the top 10 shootout. And really, it's looked like Lando Norris and McLaren having the edge. Norris in particular having a few extra tenths over his own teammate. But roles were reversed, and it seemed like Norris didn't quite get the best in his second run on the soft tyre and ended up behind his teammate. Sprint pole going to Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris alongside, with Leclerc in third, Max Verstappen in fourth.
Andrew Benson joined us, as well as Jolyon Palmer. And Jolyon, this is good news for McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 1-2. It's as good as it gets for McLaren. I think there's also probably good news for them in terms of having Leclerc ahead of Verstappen as well, because you can expect an attack from Max, as we've spoken about. He's always going to give it a whirl. And he has a 5-place grid penalty for the Grand Prix. With the pace that McLaren have got, I think more than the 1-2, it's the dominance they showed through the qualifying hour. No one got close to them. And so I think for the whole weekend, generally, on a weekend where Max has a 5-place grid penalty, they could make some inroads. And
when it comes to the Constructors' Championship, Benny, 29 points separate McLaren from Ferrari, who are now in second place, and then 25 points further back, it's Red Bull. And this all feeds into that, doesn't it? It feeds into the excitement, I suppose it is, around the Constructors' Championship.
Well, both championships, Jenny. I mean, it's a good opportunity for McLaren. Piastri's ahead of Norris on the front row, but he's not going to finish ahead of Norris if they get to the first corner, first and second, because they've made it very clear that they'll impose team orders and they'll get Piastri to help him as much as they can. And on a race weekend where Verstappen has exceeded his engine allowance for the second time this year, as Jolene was saying, if he can only qualify fourth today, behind on pace the McLarens and Leclerc's Ferrari, there's every possibility he could qualify fourth or in a similar sort of place tomorrow for the Grand Prix. That would put him down in ninth, and that would give Norris an opportunity to make some significant inroads in points for the championship.
I think it's also big for Piastri to have the pole today, because he's been outshone overall this year. The talk has been Norris v Verstappen. Obviously, Perez is his own talk for a negative way. Piastri's had some great highs. He's had 2 wins, some fantastic overtakes, but his qualifying pace has not been on a par with Norris. And for the most part, it looked like it wasn't. There was actually a big gap between them through the first couple of parts of qualifying. But at the end, new set of tyres for him. He had to deliver on that one lap to get ahead of Lando. And he did. So I think just for a personal boost for him, starting from pole, even if he can't deliver the win and there's team orders, some papaya rules, maybe we'll hear tomorrow, at least for his confidence after a couple of bad rounds of qualifying and a complete non-event for him really in Mexico is pretty big.
I completely agree with you on Piastri, but he has to get out of the way at the earliest convenience. If it's not going into turn 1 and Norris gets a better start, he has to get out of the way to allow Lando Norris to take maximum points this weekend. 34 points up for grabs this weekend, 120 for the rest of the season. And at a weekend where Verstappen and Red Bull are on the back foot now, not only in terms of that engine penalty, but in terms of pace as well. Norris has had the edge of the field since FP1. This is crucial that McLaren, they can't waste time in any kind of dilly-dallying. They need to be on it from the start and ensure that they and Lando Norris score the maximum points possible. That, this weekend, is what decides if this championship carries on to the end of the year, in my opinion.
Here's a question for you all. Do you know how many times, including the sprint and the Grand Prix, Piastri has finished between Norris and Verstappen.
That is a niche piece of knowledge that I don't have the answer to.
So how many times has he taken points away from one or the other?
Not enough, is my answer.
Andrew's going to know this. He's the oracle of motorsport.
I do not know. I know he finished ahead of Verstappen in Spa, which Norris failed to do, despite Verstappen having an engine penalty. I'm just racking my brains. I can't think of any.
Twice. One was all the way back in Jeddah, where Norris had a difficult race. Piastri had a really strong second race of the season. And so that was 2 points away from Norris, in advantage of Verstappen, in a sense. Verstappen was, of course, winning the race easily. The other one was the sprint in Austria. There's the only 2 times all season that Piastri has, in either way, Norris being ahead or Verstappen being ahead, the only 2 times that Piastri's been in the middle has been Norris behind, and he's taken a point away from Lando in Austria. He's never been building the gap between Norris being ahead and putting Verstappen and another place down. He can do that tomorrow with papaya rules or whatever team orders they employ. And that would be some use now to McLaren, because they need every driver they can to fill the gaps between Norris and Verstappen, because obviously if Max finishes behind Lando, Max has the cushion.
And that's an interesting stat, because it's quite a few races now since McLaren decided on this definite policy. And it started in Azerbaijan after what was frankly a bit of a mess up by McLaren in Monza, where they qualified first and second on the front row. Piastri overtook Norris on the first lap, and Norris had a wobble at the chicane. As a result of that move, Leclerc got between them, and that led to Leclerc winning the race, and then Piastri second, then Norris third. It was that race, in combination with the Red Bull's weak performance there, that convinced McLaren finally that they really did have a chance to win the Drivers' Championship, which I don't think they really believed before. But in every race since then, Azerbaijan, Singapore, Austin, Mexico, for whatever reason, Piastri and Norris have been completely apart from each other on the track. In Azerbaijan, it was Piastri ahead because Norris had a problem in qualifying. Every other race, it was Norris ahead and Piastri not quite in the game, as you say, Jolien. So it's a good opportunity for them this weekend, especially if he can deliver the same for Grand Prix qualifying, to really make some inroads in the points gap there.
Can they trust Piastri at this point?
100%.
100%. Okay, that's not a question then. And let's talk about Ferrari, because they've come on strong. 1-2 in the first of the triple headers. Then they switched around, and obviously Norris got the second place, but 2 on the podium. And up to second place in the championship. And people are starting to have belief that Ferrari could take the constructors, which gets people very excited.
I think they've got a great chance. The way that they've got both drivers consistently performing now is like neither McLaren or Red Bull. Obviously, McLaren are on the back of a good day, but as Andrew said, things have been going wrong. Piastri was nowhere near the races in Mexico, and hardly in Austin as well. So you've got both drivers performing at a similar level that's very good. You've got a car and a strategy and a pit stops, everything that's working quite well. Qualifying's not their forte. The racing should be better for them. And on top of this, you've got the better working Red Bull and the better working McLaren taking lumps out of each other, which has handed the last 2 races to them anyway. So there's a lot of things going towards Ferrari. I think if you're McLaren right now, they've got Norris in the title fight, in the Drivers' Championship fight, but I don't even know if they've really believed that he's there to win the title. And maybe after Mexico, some things have changed. But meanwhile, Verstappen is so thinking that he's in the title that he's kind of sabotaging their constructors by going all guns blazing for the Drivers' Championship, and in Austin allowing Ferrari through to a 1-2, and in Mexico allowing Leclerc to come through and putting Norris miles back from a potential win.
I think momentum is something as well that's really with particularly Sainz at Ferrari at the moment, obviously off the back of a brilliant win for him and him seeing out the end of his tenure at Ferrari. I think that is driving him forwards. Yes, he was out-qualified today in the sprint by Charles Leclerc, but once again, they've looked pretty nip and tuck throughout a weekend, and at times Leclerc has actually looked a little bit more wobbly in the end, though, when it matters, Leclerc starting ahead. So I think it is going to be really important at the start for Sainz to get his elbows out and try and help Ferrari move forward, because the McLarens at the moment do seem a little bit beyond Ferrari's reach right now, but I think the race pace might show something different.
Yeah, and let's not rule Ferrari out from the sprint race. Remember what happened in Austin a couple of races ago. Leclerc qualified 3rd there in the sprint, Sainz 5th, and if they hadn't battled so hard in the opening laps, Sainz ending up getting ahead of Leclerc, people thought that actually, in fact, McLaren felt that Ferrari could have gone for the win in the sprint if they just played it a bit more tactically. So I think Leclerc, their race pace has been so strong, Ferrari, recently. He could definitely challenge the McLarens. So they might need McLaren, for example, to use Piastri as some kind of block to get Norris in front and keep Leclerc away from Norris as much as they can, as well as Verstappen, of course.
I think they'll be seeing Verstappen as the lap one threat, and once the positions have settled, then Ferrari will be the threat for the McLaren 1-2. I feel like Ferrari have been underplayed a little bit with how well they've done to even get into contention for the championship. Do you remember the summer months when Ferrari were nowhere after their Barcelona upgrade flopped, and we had Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, and they were scrabbling around fourth best team comfortably. Mercedes came to the fore. All the chat was Verstappen and Norris. Piastri getting his win in Hungary as well, and Ferrari just weren't in contention. Then they brought this upgrade in Monza, and it's like everything suddenly clicked for them. Leclerc won with the good strategy, and could have won in Baku. And now they're hitting the form. And it is with both drivers. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I mean, I consider them title favourites, actually, at this point.
I do agree with you. I also think it's worth pointing out, obviously, they had to get on top of the bouncing issues that Ferrari had, and introducing a new floor really helped. But also, I think I feel like we've been here before with Ferrari, where they've got momentum around them and then it kind of flops. But I think it's different this time because let's not forget they lost Enrico Cardile halfway through this year, really, and Fred Vasseur has been kind of doing both roles. The technical role that Enrico Cardile left a gap behind, and Fred Vasseur, who obviously has the overarching role as team principal, kind of covering both while they fill that gap and build up for next year. We know that they've obviously got Lewis Hamilton lining up for next season as well with Leclerc. It seems like that even when you think, oh, they're a man down in the technical department, actually they're making gains. They had a wobble. They lost their way. They're bouncing back, and now they really are in the hunt for their first team's championship since 2008. Yes, got that right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So let me ask you another question, because I like the big questions today. Has there been a season, again, I'm turning to the Oracle here, Mr. Benson.
I thought it was
I let
me.
you down last time, Julian.
I know. Let's test him, right. Has there been a season where there's been so much ebb and flow between teams in the Constructors' Championship as there is this year? I'm loving 2024 because the season started with Red Bull looking like they were going to blow everyone away like they did last year. McLaren weren't in the frame at all. Suddenly, McLaren are looking like, in theory, they're a shoe-in. Ferrari, like I just said, have come back from nowhere. And I don't remember a season where Mercedes have been there.
So 2012 is the year that I really would talk about on that front. So that was a year when 7 different drivers won the first 7 races. And there was a sort of ebb and flow. The 2 quickest cars were the McLaren and the Red Bull. The Ferrari was never one of the quickest cars, but it had the best driver in it that year, and the season went down to a showdown in the final race between Vettel and Alonso.
In Brazil.
What strikes me most about this year is, what I don't think I've really seen before, apart from maybe 2009, you could argue, but different circumstances with Brawn then, obviously, is a team start the year so dominant and fall off to this extent that Red Bull have done and be caught by Ferrari and McLaren. And I'm still not completely sure exactly what's happened. Why have Red Bull not been able to develop that car? They obviously think there are some problems within it that they can maybe fix for next year. We'll see whether they can or not. But it's clear that what's happened is the McLaren and Ferrari have moved up. Red Bull haven't really moved at all. Why?
Isn't this the idea of the rules now in Formula One? Wind tunnel restrictions for the best team, CFD, basically development restrictions that are on the best team. Is there an argument that says, yes, maybe Red Bull have hit a ceiling, but the rules are kind of working where the field is tightening. Those that struggled the year before get more development time to catch up. And actually, a few years into this, we're seeing it play out to the benefit of the competitiveness.
I think it is. I think also the element, as you say, of the cost cap. The key making of this will be seeing what next season brings, and is it going to be utter domination from a McLaren or Ferrari all of a sudden, and is this just going to repeat cyclically. I hope not. And I tend to agree with what you've just said. But so are we sort of saying then this is the best overall season since 2012?
Since 2012?
Or
Well,
I know 21 was good, but that was really only Hamilton versus Verstappen, right? The rest of the field.
But it's still
who
only a
was?
2-horse race when you come to the title. It's
is, but-
just that you
but-
see more people winning this year.
No, but I mean in general terms of the season, look, we've got good fighting up and down the grid. It is super close between P1 and actually P20. We haven't seen that in a long time, and I think this generally is one of the best seasons overall up and down the grid since probably that 2012 year.
I think that to be a really great season, I think the championship's got to go to the last race this year. I think otherwise, at the moment we're all sort of getting G'd up by the idea that it can go to the last race. But the points gap is still really big between Verstappen and Norris, and it could swing so easily to Verstappen's favour. One retirement by Norris, whether it be some kind of mechanical failure or an accident, it's basically all over. If he can keep delivering and it goes right down to the last race, then I think we can start talking about it being the best season since 2012 or whatever. It has been close in terms of the battling through the field. Yes, it's the closest since 2012. But in terms of of looking at the season holistically, as in, is it one of the greatest ever seasons? I would say no, not yet.
But I think the only
Could
way...
be.
Yeah.
Could be.
You're just holding on for Abu Dhabi, aren't you, to tell us if it's the best season ever, or if actually, no, it's a long way away. We'll find out on round 24. Yeah. I've enjoyed it. We've had 20 races. So here's a stat. I don't think there's ever been... Yeah, I've been enjoying it. I've had a fruitful week. I don't think there's been a time... Okay, I haven't done the full research on the stat, but the top 6 drivers in the championship currently have all won at least 2 races, which shows how well the wins have been divvied up amongst the top teams. It includes Hamilton for Mercedes, now both Ferrari drivers, both McLarens and Max. On top of that, you've got George Russell taking a win, and the drama of his Spa non-win, which gave Hamilton his second win. To be honest, the rest of it's not been shared out between the rest of the field because the reliability has been so good, and Perez has had a few podiums but not looked close to a win. But amongst the top 7, there's been such ebb and flow. And also I challenge you to go back and think of too many dull races this year. 2021 was an amazing season that we were all lucky enough to work in. But it came down to a Hamilton versus Verstappen. You couldn't script the drama of getting to the last race level on points. This year is very different. It's the hare and the tortoise, isn't it? But race by race, we might be getting better races than even 2021.
That's what stands this out. I completely get what you mean, Andrew. If it doesn't go to the wire, it almost feels like that last sort of icing on the cake has slipped by. But it's that journey that we've gone on from Bahrain even till now. When I still remember vividly standing in the paddock in Bahrain, kind of a bit deflated after that race because it just seemed like it was going to be a Verstappen walkover year. And to the journey that we've all gone on with this season on track, as well as all the off-track controversies that have happened up and down the grid as well, that to me is what clinches it, whether or not the title goes to the final round in Abu Dhabi.
It's got to get there, hasn't it, really, for it to... I do agree with Andrew's point, but I just also think this season, because I feel like it's under the radar, and I don't think it's being celebrated enough as a fantastic season to be commentating on the sport.
So Ferrari have given us some great moments this season and will continue to do that. But we can't say the same for Sergio Perez. He seems so glum and the performances just aren't coming. It seems forever since he was actually on the podium. I think you have to go back to the first 5 races this season for him to have been on the podium. Has he just lost his mojo? Jolien, what happens to a driver when they get in this rut? How does it come about?
Well, I mean, he's had a deficit to Max Verstappen all the time they've been teammates. It's a compounded issue now because Red Bull are not the best car. And so if he's having a deficit of about half a second, instead of being able to still qualify in the top 5 or at least the top 7 or 8 and racing back through to a podium in what was the best car in the last couple of years, they don't have that anymore. So Max is for all we can question his racing, he is actually swashbuckling right now in what is probably the third best car, maybe the fourth sometimes. He's doing a great job. And that means if you're having a deficit compared to a 3-time world champion, then you're no longer in the top 8. You're actually struggling to make Q3. And in Mexico, his home race, which should, and Red Bull really hoped would be somewhat of a turnaround for him, he was just genuinely out comfortably in Q1.
It's been a terrible season for Sergio Perez. He said that himself, and it's almost hard to watch at times. But, I mean, Joleon's nailed it on the head. Now that things have closed up, it's compounded that, and the fact that Red Bull have fallen back, that's only worsened Perez's woes. But, I mean, Perez is a better racer than he is a qualifier. I think that's fair to say. But he's being just completely annihilated this year, and off track as well. The pressure is mounting week in, week after. I actually don't know how somebody deals with that. With every single race weekend, there's pressure on Perez. It's coming from, well, Daniel Ricciardo initially, and that whole thing flopped. And then now we've got the Liam Lawson chatter, or is actually going to be a Colapinto comes in from nowhere. You know, it's everybody but Perez. But yet he's still in that seat. They've still not chucked him out. And there's reasons behind that. Is there anybody that can do better? That's the question. Those who have come in before him have all fallen by the wayside. Nobody has gone well in that second seat at Red Bull against Max Verstappen. Nobody. Perez is the next name in a long line of number 2 drivers that suffer and perhaps have their career terminated as a result. Gasly and Albon, escapees that have managed to rebuild elsewhere.
Do you think they went too early on and re-signing him? I mean, everyone went very early because of what happened with Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton. It forced people's hands. It made people do some interesting things. Like Sainz, he's out. He's at Williams. I don't know if he signed too early. Perez signed too early. Andrew?
They didn't go too early. They knew the situation. Sainz lost his Ferrari drive before the season even started. Sainz has an option for Red Bull from February. They just chose January, sorry. They just chose not to take it. Now, from a performance point of view, you have to say that's the wrong decision. When Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz were teammates at Toro Rosso, it's a long time ago now, and obviously Verstappen's improved as a driver, but probably so has Carlos Sainz. They were pretty even, particularly in qualifying. Verstappen probably had the edge in races then. You would have to say, or you would expect, that Sainz would be an upgrade on Perez. But they didn't want to take him because they felt that it might be too disruptive of the team harmony. Many people have questioned that decision because it's not just about now or next year. It's also about what happens after next year. If Max Verstappen leaves to go to Mercedes, for example, at the end of 25, which is a possibility, then what do? They've got Perez and somebody else, which might be George Russell or somebody. They've potentially put themselves in quite a sticky spot, but they're also in a sticky spot in terms of wanting to replace him, because what are their options? Liam Lawson's in that second RB seat now, effectively as an audition for Perez's drive. But even if he destroys Yuki Tsunoda over the remaining races in the season, does that mean he's ready to go against Max Verstappen in a Red Bull? That's a big call, you know. And if they do that, then we've got to find someone for the second RB seat as well, which might be Colapinto, the way things are going at the moment. They're certainly talking about that. So it's a very difficult spot that Red Bull have found themselves in.
Do you think Perez will be in the car next year?
No. I don't know that, but that's my gut at the moment.
It's difficult to see how he can be.
Yeah.
Because his performances have become untenable for what is, even if they don't have the best car, they are a top team that still operate at the sharp end of everything. Strategy, pit stops. They are still fighting for podiums, if not race wins with Verstappen. You cannot have a second driver that's scrabbling to get a point at the moment. So it's difficult to see that Perez can be retained. I think they signed the contract to try and give him a boost in confidence early in the season. It's not worked. And I'd be very surprised if he would see out that contract that expires at the end of 2026. But the question is, who can replace? And I agree with Andrew that Liam Lawson is looking pretty good. He's doing a better job than Daniel Ricciardo did in the RB. He had another good day today. He had a couple of points on debut in Austin, debut for this season. He's looking great, but it's so different stepping up to Red Bull to be teammates with Verstappen, that is such a tough ask. And he'll have only had, 9 Grand Prix under his belt to then go up against probably the best in the sport. It's too big a task. I really believe Red Bull have made a mistake not signing Carlos Sainz, who's a proven race winner. He's up against one of the most highly rated drivers in the field, and he's making a very solid fist of it. And he's a consistent peddler. And they've let him go to Williams because of other team issues around the fathers of Verstappen and Sainz. But it does leave, as Andrew said, a big hole in Red Bull's driver lineup.
Yeah, and for next year, Perez has got to be out of the car. But I think that's why logically it now is Lawson, because there's no one else. In terms, if you're looking for that experience level,
but how are Red Bull? These guys walked the championship last year. They won 21 of 22 races. They dominated the first part of this season. How are Red Bull looking around and thinking there's no one else? It's ridiculous.
Doesn't it highlight sort of the fall of their driver program over the last couple of years? It seems to have kind of had the level sucked out of it a bit. They've had a few drivers come and go. They've let young drivers go, and then they had a stockpile. They chose Perez out of their Red Bull program. They went away from that. It seemed to be a good move at first, but obviously it's now faded away and proven to worsen. So Lawson is the logical one now, because they're not going for Tsunoda, and if there isn't anybody else on the market, which I completely get your point, how have they gotten to that stage for next year? Lawson's the only guy they can go to.
Yeah, they've left themselves in this position by not being proactive. Already, Checo had a very difficult run at the end of last year. Perez was struggling a lot. And they've not been proactive. They surely, with the car they had, could have signed almost any of the non-top line big money drivers in the field. But anyone else, they probably could have signed over the winter. But now that you're looking at it and you're thinking, it's not that enticing. And everyone else pretty much has a contract, as Harry's mentioning.
Well, on top of that, one of the side stories that came out of Mexico last week was the battle between Liam Lawson in the RB and Red Bull's Sergio Perez. Lawson collided with the Red Bull on lap 19, and then later in the race, Lawson flicked him the bird when he passed Perez. Let's listen to him.
Obviously, my goal is not to go out and make enemies of anybody. I'm not trying to cause any issues or anything like that. But at the same time, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to win, and that's what I'm focused on doing. And in this situation, we're fighting very hard for P6 in the constructors, and I'm fighting for, obviously, for my future in Formula 1 as well. So that's what I'm focused on.
Is Fernando trying to put young guys down coming up, and is Checo trying to muddy your name so that you don't take his seat?
I have no idea. I don't think there's anything behind it. Obviously, in the moment, things are very heated, and obviously I apologise for what I did last week. It was not something I should have done, and something I won't be doing again. But I have no idea their mindsets or their goals. I'm just focused on mine.
And clearly Lawson is coming out there all guns blazing. I mean, you don't enter F1 like that if you want to go under the radar and just taste it out, take your time. I mean, he's come in, bang.
No, and I think, he's trying to stay true to who he is and make himself a name. But I think this could go against him a little bit with regards to that Red Bull seat, because they don't want somebody punchy who's going to cause problems. They've got Max Verstappen, who's their punchy guy who tells it as it is. They want somebody who's there as a solid backup, don't they?
They like punchy drivers. They like people who get their elbows out and race. They like people who have no respect for their rivals.
As teammates?
Well, I don't think they'll see him as a threat to Verstappen. And I think the biggest problem for them, potentially, is he goes in, he doesn't do any better than Perez. Then what do they do?
Try the next one.
I like that Lawson has come out swinging this year against Alonso and Perez in a way. And I like that he's not intimidated by them on track. And I don't think he's done anything particularly wrong. I think there's been aggressive moves. I don't think he did anything particularly wrong against Alonso. It was a squeeze in Austin, and it was 50-50 with Perez in Mexico. I think flipping the bird in a race is a bit petulant, and I think he shouldn't do that. But I just think that rubs people up the wrong way. And you're in your second race of the season. It's been a 50-50. And you look at some of the other grievances in that race where people have kept a calm head and carried on and got more out of it. I think that's a battle that he doesn't need to be having. But to be fair, hearing him there, quite contrite, and he probably realises, he has a point to prove. He's got to keep a lid on it because that stuff will go against you if you're doing those sort of petulant things. But, he's apologised for it. He's young. He's not got much experience. And I think he comes across well.
Did you ever flip the bird at anyone, or were you always cool, calm and collected? No petulance from Palmer?
I don't remember. I would have done it at my time at some point, but... No one was here to criticise it, so it's fine.
We didn't have all the cameras. Right.
I'll go back and listen to the archive Checker Flag podcast.
There's a nice Jolien Palmer analysis in there.
Yeah, we never said anything bad about you, don't worry. Jolien, thank you so much. Harry, Andrew. The race is on 5 Sports Extra on Sunday from 5 o'clock. Our build-up will be from 4:45. That's it from us. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.